Alright, what's up, everyone? So I'm back again with another lecture. This time we're going to be going over 1930 to 1940. This will be from pretty much when the Great Depression starts, and then it'll go into pretty much the beginning of World War II. Well, the beginning of World War II in Europe, but it'll overlap with kind of like how things ramp up within the US. And so I graded everything to get started. I did grade everything. All the papers should be in. You do have another one due next week, I believe. Kind of like on the 15th, February 15th. That one, just focus heavily on citing whatever source you tend to use. And so I know in the syllabus I do have a list of books that either I give you the option. You can either buy them, look them up, or just pretty much use them as sources. You can get them at the public library. You can also get them online on Amazon if you want to purchase them. I don't believe they're through the not Right State. They're through the UC library. You may be able to find them, but those are books that I've found elsewhere. And so, otherwise, everyone's doing pretty good in the class. There's no complaints. I'm glad that I have gotten feedback from a couple of you about this writing assignment being a new, basically a breath of fresh air. Some of you have enjoyed the assignment. Hopefully, many of you have enjoyed the assignment. But otherwise, yeah, everything seems pretty good so far. If you do have any questions, if there's something that I'm doing that you need help with, or if there's something that would help you on my end, please let me know. Feel free to email me. Yes, this is Taters is back again. And so, otherwise, yeah, I am decked out in my P40 shirt, and then on the back it also has that as well. And then I also have my little mug because that is my favorite aircraft. And we will be talking a little bit about the ramping up of the military industry in the United States and how it becomes basically a warring state moving into the war. And so at this point, though, we're all in a depression. We got no money. We're all homeless. And so 1930, that's when I believe that's when FDR gets elected president, and he creates a program that is used to create more jobs and stabilize the economy through the New Deal. So that is his plan. By this point, though, about 3.2 million people are unemployed. And it's just getting worse, especially out in the Great Plains area. You get a whole lot of famine, and not a whole lot of rain comes through in that year. And so then now you get the Dust Bowl. And so the Dust Bowl basically ruins all the crops, nothing but dirt, and that's it. So thousands of farmers have to look elsewhere for jobs and for money, which means they all start migrating out west. And out west isn't any better, especially within the city limits. And so this is widespread panic. This happens for a few years, and unemployment raises even more. And so by 1933, it's about 13 million people. And so now, So at this point, that's when FDR becomes president, and he comes up with the New Deal and everything. So this is when jobs are being provided. He creates funds for the federal government and to fund federal projects. And basically, his idea is if we give the opportunity for people to make more money and throw it back into the economy, then we are able to pull ourselves out of this. And so that will be basically make money to spend money, essentially. And so now he also comes up with this emergency banking bill. So the emergency banking bill, that essentially is he took the U.S. Off of the gold standard briefly. And so this allowed all these banks to reopen who were focusing on or who were heavily financed on the gold standard. It allowed them to reopen, and then allowed the Federal Reserve to provide funds to invest back into these banks. And so now this happened for about a week, and it ended up recuperating, and they actually did pretty well. And after that, he also started focusing on the Dust Bowl and people out in the Great Plains in the South. and he institutionalized this idea of the Agricultural Adjustment Pact or Act. And so through this, farmers, they were able to reduce production but also get paid as well for their time off. So that means that even though they're not able to make as many crops because of this widespread famine, or unemployment, stuff like that, they're still able to make their money. And so no harm, no foul, and everything. And also by this point, even though I did not talk about it too much, prohibition. So after World War One, when everyone started coming back, you did get a lot of PTSD. You got a whole lot of people who started drinking, who started focusing on alcohol. Alcoholism rose to an exponential rate throughout the U.S. So the government did something about it and outlawed it. So now you got prohibition. And so prohibition, that's when you get a lot of those the rum runners. You got the the bootleggers and people like that who illegally tried to sell alcohol across state borders, across state lines, stuff like that. But by this time, prohibition ends, about like late 1933, I believe. And so with the 21st Amendment, that repeals the 18th one, which basically taxed or increased on liquor once they are made legal. And so now, 1934, in the U.S., about 200,000, give or take, 200,000 workers, they ended up going on strike out in Massachusetts and Georgia. And about 1.5 million nationwide ended up going on strike. So by this time this year, it's just widespread panic. People are fed up with the federal government. They want something done about it. So now the Wagner Act, that comes out the following year after all these strikes are coming up. The Wagner Act was basically due to these labor strikes, and it focuses on basically relations and like making labor more tolerable. And so it guaranteed workers the right to form these unions to protect them within the labor system. And they were able to bargain for better conditions and stuff like that. So it ended up working out a little bit better for them. Social Security Act started coming around. So Social Security Act basically established benefits for people who were both like unemployed due to like being handicapped, disorders, the elderly, disability, physical and mentally disabled people, and women and children, stuff like that too, who were, men who had women and children, families, and they weren't able to make as much money. So that helped them. Now, by this time, though, as this stuff was going on, as FDR was trying to fix the economy in the U.S., that's when things started getting pretty bad in Europe. So, by 1936, the Spanish Civil War outbreak, because I believe there is a civil war. Well, there is the rebel versus the loyalists within Spain, and so the nationalists, basically Germany and Italy, they back all of those rebels who wanted to take down the Spanish Empire. The Spanish Republic was backed by the Soviet Union and Mexico. All right, and so by this time, Hitler also reinstitutionalized the military, because at first, if you guys remember, after World War One, the Treaty of Versailles, they took down everything in terms of the military structure, in terms of military production, military size. They weren't allowed to have a navy, stuff like that. Well, by this time, Hitler kind of goes against that, and he starts ramping up production on the military. He wants to create a new, revitalized military. That's when you get, by this point, you get production like the BF-109, I believe the ME-110, stuff like planes like that, where they're totally revolutionized. Hitler, or Germany by this point, has one of the strongest air forces in the world. This is also, by this point, he has the Stuka dive bomber. So if you guys may have heard, kind of like the the screaming plane that goes into a dive, that's the Ju-87 Stuka. Also, fun fact, George Lucas, for the TIE fighters in episode 4, 5, and 6 in Star Wars, he used the sound of the the Jericho trumpet or Jericho sirens that the Ju-87s used on their planes. Fun fact. And so, yeah, I digress. So now Germany is fully rearmed under a secret rearmament thing between 33 and 34. By 37, FDR has that good neighbor speech. He knows that war is ramping out in Europe, in Spain, and he knows that he may end up getting pulled into it, but he assures the people that he wants to stay neutral. So that's the good neighbor speech. And now, at this time as well, Germany is heavy on military conscription. So now his army itself is building up back home as well. And now, by this point, two things. So Japan and Germany, by this point, things are going on. So I'm going to talk about Germany first, and I'm going to talk about Japan as well after that. And both of these places have things going on that are going to pull the U.S. into the war. So now it's going to be three separate categories, all right? And so now, 1938, stuff has already happened, like Kristallnacht, which was, bring out the good old whiteboard, because there's a list of things. So Kristallnacht was basically their start of violence against Jews. And so not the start. There was some tensions and some violent acts towards them prior to this, but this is when things finally go public. And by this point, shops are burned down, people are stabbed, places are vandalized. It's insane. And so Jews. So now you get this. So Kristallnacht essentially was just the public violence against Jews in Germany. And so then, by this point as well, Germany also asked for the annexation of Austria because most of them were of German descent, and he believed that they had a right to gain that territory back. Also, he was given that land back. Sudetenland. So that as well was given to him. And that as well, under the same thing, he said because they are given the right to decide whether they want to become part of Germany or not. They decide to become part of Germany, they take it back. So Germany takes it back. And so now you got, that is called the Anschluss and the Sudetenland. So Anschluss. There you go. So that Sudetenland, that was basically land taken from Czechoslovakia. And Czechoslovakia had no say in the matter at all. And so, there you go. So you can, pause, take a picture of it, and do what you want. So there you go, Anschluss and Sudetenland. So now, by this point, because Germany now has Sudetenland, he also will take Czechoslovakia. So there you go. So now, right here, there's Germany. And so now he's taking over all this territory, and basically all these allied states are just giving it to him. And so by this point, by September 1st, he decides to invade Poland. Well, he makes a pact with Russia to also invade Poland, and by doing so, they create a boundary. Poland has no say in the matter, And so Russia invades Poland from the east, whereas Germany now pushes into Poland from the west. And so now Germany has Czechoslovakia down here, half of Poland, and then also Austria right down here. And then now all he's got this border that goes from the from basically the Mediterranean Sea straight through to the North Sea. He's got all that territory into the Baltic. And so now Britain and France are essentially being they have an issue now. So Germany is pushing now out west. They know they want more of, so this is another term. Oh yeah, marker. So they have the idea called Lebensraum. So Lebensraum is essentially just living room for the people. They believe that they have a divine right to more room to establish a unified Germany, essentially. So if I can spell it right. There you go. Yeah. So this is how you say it. Oh. That's bad. So Lebensraum. So you got things like that, and then he also so he starts off with creating more land for the German people, unifying Germany, unifying the fatherland, and then he does stuff like creates laws against tobacco. He creates the laws with like what was it natural parks, the natural parks and stuff like that. He's gathering the opinions of the people. He's pulling people out of this recession that the Treaty of Versailles basically dumped Germany into. He's bringing them out of this depression. And he does this tremendously well. And he also creates this new car called the so I'm going to spell it, and hopefully you guys you'll know when you see it. So he creates a new car he doesn't manufacture it, but it's called the Volkswagen. So Volkswagen, of course, is when you break it down, Volks is people, Wagen is essentially people. Volks people, Wagen is essentially like a car, an automobile. So he creates this well-manufactured, easily purchasable car that is economical. And so now everyone can have a vehicle in Germany. And so now he calls it the people's car. And so that is essentially what we now have as Volkswagen or the Beetle and places and things like that. The Jetta, the other cars like that as well, the Passat, so on and so forth. And so because Germany now has this giant land boundary between East and West Europe, France and Britain, Britain, now they declare war on Germany on September 3rd. And so by this time, the Allies need weapons. They need weapons by this point. And so FDR signs a neutrality act. So this essentially means that this ends the arms embargo. So it allows Allied planes to be sent over to purchase arms, or sent over in exchange for purchasing. So they're allowed to purchase arms, but then we can send it to them because they purchased it. And so we're not allowed to actually just start sending things over and supplying them without any financial gain in it. And so it's kind of like a way around it to kind of like keep neutrality, but also not at the same time. And so I'm going to stop there. Now I'm going to move over to Japan. So throughout in Japan, so they have this idea of, oh, where's my eraser? Oh yeah. So Japan, they have this rising tension amongst the civil government and also the military government. So the military government, they don't want to be looked down as a power. So they want to be labeled as a superpower along with everyone else. And that means to grow bigger, to have more research, to show them that is not looked down upon. So all this stuff throughout the 1920s, because of those the issues that they had with keeping Asian immigrants out of the U.S., now there's growing anti-Western sentiment within Japan. And so there's an increase in also nationalism. And so now, this comes shortly after the Johnson-Reed Immigration Act that was signed back in the 1920s. And so, by 1930 in Japan, there's a London Naval Treaty. So, Japan, because it is... Where is it? Oh, yeah. So, because Japan, if you guys see, it's essentially an island. And so, Japan, they needed a new and revitalized navy and a much more modern navy. So, who are they going to look to? They can't look to Russia. They can, but Russia is also, there's a lot of mainland areas. They don't have to have a navy to fight other countries. They can look to Britain as well, because they're also an island. They can look to France, but also France is also partially inland. They can still invade or fight without a navy. Same with Spain. They don't want to look to the U.S. They're like, no more Western influence. They don't want anything to do with the U.S., so they look to Britain. Britain is going to be their main ally when it comes to revitalizing their navy. They take a lot of influence from Britain. They want British advisors to come over to Japan and show them techniques on, aircraft carrier, shipbuilding, tactics on how to utilize the navy. And so by this time, the London Naval Treaty Act, basically it limited sub-warfare back in 1924, but also it increased naval construction within Japan. And so by this time, the only thing was that I think of the Hai. So Hai. So essentially, it was I believe it was a military ship that was transferred over into a trainer. So that was the only ship that was switched over to become a trainer for Japan. And so because of this Neutrality Act or Naval Treaty Act, Japan ends up withdrawing later on in 1935 once they get their navy up and going. So now 1928 comes along, and these Japanese extremists, they end up bombing a train carrying Chang Shu-lin. So Chang Shu-lin, he was a leader of Manchuria at that time, and unfortunately I believe he was killed. So then by that time, Tanaka Gichi, he ended up not investigating the matter, and because of military resistance, he just let it go. And so now they have an alibi. And it's not an alibi, but now they have a reason to push into Manchuria. So Manchuria, where is it? Yeah. So once you cross into there, Manchuria will be up north, right over there. And so, yeah. So now, did I get that right? Yes, I did. Yeah. So now, where is it? Yeah. So now, this is 1928. By 30, though, military and civilian leaders, they could become increasingly separate. And so now the ideology from the military side was that Japan needs more resources. It has a growing industrial economy and it has a growing population, and it needs more room for this population, but also needs more resources. They do not have the capacity to build a navy or military capable of becoming a powerful or a world power. So, Manchuria, on the other hand, they held raw materials such as like coal, iron, and wood, and it would take more resources to keep the Russians at bay. And so now to do so, they would have to take Manchuria and use that as a buffer zone against Russia to, sustain their economy. So the Mukden incident. So I'm going to write that down. Mukden. 1931. So, the Mukden incident. There you go. And so that was essentially, it was an outpost out in Manchuria that suddenly just exploded. And so now the Chinese nationalists by Japan were blamed for this explosion. And Manchuria was then invaded and captured by Japan. It gave them a reason to invade Manchuria. So now they renamed it Manchukuo. And so now I'm going to explain that, man. Oop. Yeah, man. There you go. So now that it becomes officially a puppet state. And so a puppet state essentially is a territory that is essentially used as a means for the mainland. So Manchukuo, because of its resources, it's only used for its resources. Japan doesn't really care so much about the land so much as it's just resource heavy. That's all they're there for. And so it's just used for military purposes. Alright, so I'm going to remove this over here. Alright. So now that they have a reason to invade China by this point, move this over here. Yeah. So February 9th, 1932, now they just need a way to push out all of the civilian government and then just take over the Japan. The Japan's government will be under military rule, essentially. And they need a way to do that. There's 3 coups that happen. The League of Blood incident, March 15th, and then the February 26th incident. All of those subsequently lead to the overthrow of the civil government and the establishment of full power, military power under Emperor Hirohito. So, 1932, February 9th, League of Blood was basically all these naval officers. They planned to overthrow the government because of an agreement. Oh, because of that agreement with the London Naval Treaty. So, because of that, they pissed them off. So now they're going to be like, well, we need to get rid of these people who applied for this freaking London Naval Treaty. So then they assassinate politicians. They want to assassinate politicians to then give power to Emperor Hirohito. And then, unfortunately, it did not go over as well as they had hoped. So now, out of all the military officials that they wanted to kill, I believe only 2 of them ended up being killed. The prime minister, or the former prime minister, and then the head of Constitutional Democratic Party was assassinated. And so it didn't really do much of anything. It never really made any headway. And so now, May 15th, 1932, they tried again. So a group of military personnel, they ended up attacking again, and they ended up killing what was it? So where is it? Yeah, so they ended up killing Inukai Tsuyoshi. I'm gonna write these people down. So they ended up killing a few other people now. So this was the main guy, Inukai Tsuyoshi. So he was the prime minister. 11 people. Yeah. 11 people. Alright, so they assassinate this guy, Inukai Tsuyoshi. So, by doing so, they ended up eliminating, basically, they eliminated parties, political parties within Japan outright. So, also, fun fact, his last words, if I can say it right, Hanisaba Wataru. So, essentially, he said, if I could talk, you would understand. But then they come back and say, Mandu Muyo. So, Mandu Muyo is essentially, dialogue is useless. So then they ended up shooting him. There's like 11 people there. 11 people were part of this insurrection, and they ended up shooting him all together. And so he was pretty much just vaporized by bullets. And so now we come to February 26th. That was several years later. So by this point, the military officials are starting to gain momentum. They're starting to get their word out there that the civil government is being influenced by Western power, by European power. They need their own power. They need their own people to make these decisions, not people who are influenced by outside leaders. And so 1936 becomes the coup de grace of everything. There we go. So 1,400 soldiers. Oh, it gets pretty bad here. So 1,400 soldiers, all together, they make this plan to occupy these government buildings and basically force their hand in establishing control with Emperor Hirohito. So they want to just purge everybody. And so just eliminate corruption and establish a military reform and essentially just give Emperor Hirohito the okay to just do whatever he wants. And so it's a whole thing. So now, let me see if I can write these people all down. So the first one to die is the finance minister. The finance minister was Takahashi Kurikiyo. Minister. Kiyo. Alright. So, him. So, Takahashi Kurikiyo. So, he was shot and stabbed while sleeping. So, there was not much of a fight there. And now, when we get to the second guy, he was the foreign minister. The foreign minister was Makino Nobuki. Foreign minister. Nobuaki, sorry. So, there we go. So, there you go. Makino Nobuaki. And so, they had essentially set the building on fire with him in it. He could not find a way out, but then supposedly they heard a shot inside. So they suspect that either A, he died before the place could burn to the ground, and because he had weapons in there, the shots were just going off. Bullets were lit up. But also, they believe that he may have shot himself before the building could collapse due to flames. And so, essentially, he died. So either he shot himself or burned to death. And so the next person was Colonel Denzo Matsuo. So they marched on him, and so he heard shots ring out, and he tried to escape. And so his brother, sorry, I take that back. So the prime minister, Kisuke Okada, he was supposed to be the one dying, or to die, but instead, Colonel Denzo Matsuo, he saved him. So he warned Kisuke that they were coming for him, so he was able to escape. Colonel Denzo Matsuo was also confused with him because they looked a lot alike. And so Colonel Denzo Matsuo, he was shot to death. And then when they put up a picture next to his face, they're like, okay, yeah, that's him. So then they ended up leaving, but knowing good and well, they didn't know that the prime minister actually got away. And so Matsuo got him, and then got finally the General of Military Education. He is going to be Jotaro Watanabe. So, Jotaro Watanabe, he was to be shot and stabbed in front of his children. And so then, one more person. Yeah, Foreign Prime Minister. So that is going to be, Saito Mokoto. So he, on the other hand, his wife tried to save him. So all these guys ended up dying in this uprising. And so essentially, Saito Mokoto, he ended up being shot, and then once he fell on the ground, his wife tried to save him, but then his wife was pulled away. And sorry. So yes. So then his wife was pulled away, and then he ended up being shot to death, right in front of her. Same time, Jotaro Watanabe, he ended up being shot and stabbed in front of his wife and child. And so now, essentially, after all this happened, after all this death, the coup was officially put down. They were all arrested. Emperor Hirohito sent out this letter saying that we understand why you did this, but you have to understand that it was wrong, stuff like that. But they got not much more than a slap on the wrist, essentially. So now, this ended up helping the military gain more power within the government. And then by this point, there was nobody to oppose them. And this all happened by 36. In 37, the Marco Polo Bridge incident. So, Marco Polo Bridge. There we go. So the Marco Polo Bridge incident was between the Chinese army and the Japanese army by this point. And they were all at a stalemate up until then. So now, ultimately, I can't remember who shot first, but essentially shots rang out. So a battle ensues. This begins the war. This begins the invasion. So then by 1938, there was a national mobilization law that came out. So this national mobilization law essentially turned Japan into a state of war. This Marco Polo Bridge incident kind of kickstarts everything. Kickstarts the invasion. No, there we go. Kickstarts the invasion of mainland China, which is Southeast China is essentially where they'll be invading. And so, by this point, all resources and finances are directed towards the war effort. Essentially, anything that happens in Japan is because of the war, or because of it. It will be sent out for the war, essentially. And so, so now a couple things. Now, I'm gonna write this word down. How do you spell that? Yeah. And so now this word here is going to be very important. So this word, kokutai. So kokutai is essentially this ideology, this kind of like a warring spirit, the fighting spirit of Japan. And so you'll hear a lot of this, especially in the books by John Toland. So John Toland, super good author that when it comes to military history, especially World War II. And he talks a lot about the kokutai, or fighting spirit in Japan, especially when they're invading mainland China. And essentially, he talks about how this fighting spirit is stemming from the samurai heritage of Japan, and where it is their God-given right to defend the Asian, or basically the Asian population, against Western invaders. And so they go on this invasion with a divine moral right, essentially. And so he kind of he talks about it's kind of like a comparison. So he compares it to essentially like a sibling rivalry. And so that's kind of how Japan thought about it. And so Japan kind of tried to make sense of the matter, saying that China was heavily influenced by the Western world, and so to save it, they had to take matters into their own hands. They couldn't just let China do whatever they want. They had to tell China what to do. They had to control China in order to set them right. Sort of kind of like how a big brother has to take charge of their little brother and stuff like that. And so that's essentially their idea. And so also, if you want to take a look at John Toland's books, by all means do so. I can post links about it if you guys want to look him up. Great author. And so the same when it comes to the eastern side. And so Germany as well, because now they invaded Poland and they have a pact with Russia at the same time, Germany does not find Russia particularly friendly. And so they do not like anyone who is not of the German descent. And they believe they're Huns, barbarians, barbaric. They're non-human and things like that. And so they heavily dislike Russia. And then they want to, same thing. So the Schlieffen Plan. And so because Germany now is knocking on France's doorstep and Britain, and now they're up against the borders of Russia, they need a pact. So they sign a treaty with Russia saying they will not invade or anything, but at the same time, Germany needs more room. Hitler is advocating for more territory, but he's not giving it, so he has to take it now. And so by this point, you got Japan, who needs to take control of China, because China is allied with the Western world. And then you also got Germany, who believes that he is given a God-given right to more room, so he is going to need to take out either out here in Britain and France, and then kind of like the Western Europe area, or he's going to have to take out Russia. So what is he gonna do? So now, when it moves into China, Chiang Kai-shek. So Chiang Kai-shek, he advocates for help. So he calls on the U.S. for aid. And so, two things actually. And so, Chiang Kai-shek in China calls for aid. Claire Chennault. So Claire Chennault is going to be in charge of gathering these American volunteers who essentially will go to China and they will protect the Burma Road. So Burma was a major supply line for China, and so China ends up holding out Japan. So Japan attacks Nanjing. So Nanjing, about 300,000 people end up dying out there. Once Japan ends up attacking them. But then they're halted right at Nanjing, essentially. So they captured all this territory, but now they're kind of halted. And so now China needs help keeping them there or pushing them out. So Claire Chennault, earlier on, he advocated for more fighter command. So you got Billy Mitchell, who advocated for bomber command. You got Claire Chennault, who believes that without fighters, you can't have a good bomber group. And so essentially he uses the P-40. So the XP-40, that is, you got the P-40 right here. So the XP-40 was developed in 1938, and essentially that becomes a coastal fighter. And so at the time, because it was a peacetime aircraft, the U.S. developed it as a means of coastal defense. They believed that the only way to invade the U.S. was through in a coastal invasion out in it's on the other side. So used to looking over here, don't look over there. And so the only way is to invade it by the coast of the northeast or the east coast over here or the west coast over there. And so the U.S. builds up its navy and then establishes a naval base at, where the heck is it? That side. Yeah. Okay. So establishes a naval base at Pearl Harbor in Oahu, Japan. I mean, not Japan, Hawaii. Oahu, Hawaii. And so by doing so, they now create a boundary where they can cover the North Pacific Ocean as well as the South Pacific Ocean through this kind of territory right here, through occupying the Pacific Islands. And as well, they're neutral, and so they don't have a whole lot of war production. And so by this point, by 37, 38, I'll tell you what, the U.S. doctrine is basically to just protect their coast. And so the P-40 was it was a low to medium altitude pursuit fighter. So it was only supposed to intercept, shoot down, go back, and land. That's it. It wasn't meant for a high altitude combat. It wasn't meant for long range combat. But it was on paper it was not, I think it says it was mediocre at medium altitude, but it was even worse at high altitude. Its performance wasn't the best, especially with the Pratt and Whitney engine that it first came inside. So that was the P-36. Once it moved to the P-40, they switched it out for the Allison 1710, I want to say. And that helped improve performance a little bit better, but it still was not the greatest on high altitudes or long range. And so that's when you get to more so the Merlin engine, which was used in the Spitfire, further on the P-40N and P-40F and later variants of that too. But initially, I digress, the P-40 did its job. And so it was economical in terms of price. They were able to get it produced and shipped out immediately in high numbers and record numbers. And so now the U.S. only has a handful of fighters. So this is where I'm getting to. So now the U.S. only has the P-39, the P-36, the F-2A Buffalo, and the P-40. And so then, bombers wise, it only has the B-17, which is at that point was called the Model 299. And so they won't develop bombers till later on. I think they won't have the B-25 till 1940, and then the B-24 till 1941. But on the opposite hand, Japan. So Japan by this point, by 1937, Japan has the A5M, the KI-10, the KI-27, the KI-43. They also have attack planes like the KI-15, the B-5M, the B-5N, and they also have the KI-36. Bombers wise, they have the KI-32, the G3M, the KI-21, and the KI-30. Now, who do you think is on top? That's insane. That is generally insane. And so, the U.S. has no business at this point, but they have an obligation to help. And so, Claire Chennault, he agrees to go into China and reinforce them. And so I believe by 1940, he's already training pilots in China to combat these pilots. So essentially, so he does utilize the P-40 in Japan or in China against the Japanese Air Force and military in general. So I believe by that point, he is fighting against the KI-27 and then later on the KI-43. So... armored. So there's there's two different distinctions that helps the P-40 rise to success in Burma or in China during this early period. So at this point, the United States technically is not at war with any country. It's allowing people to volunteer to go out to fight for other nations to help out. And so by this point, after World War One, these pilots were still focused on kind of like turning dogfights. So essentially, once you tail someone, that person's going to want to bank in and kind of get behind you. So then what you do, as you're turning, you want to kind of like angle down so then you can turn and then come right in. Well, wait. Yeah, so you want to angle down and so you can come back in. And so, essentially, sorry, I totally whiffed on that example. So, you're coming in. This person sees you. Once they bank in, you know that you're going to want to turn in towards them to get on their six. And so, what you're going to do is essentially, in World War One, what a lot of them did was they did this kind of aerial dance where they're constantly trying to get in front and get behind one another. So you can't really shoot them like that. Well, you can, but it's called deflection shooting. And mainly people who are heavily into like sharpshooting or pigeon shooting, hunting, they were really good at that. But a lot of others were not. And so it was best to just get right behind the aircraft. So when they see you from far away and they're turning in, you want to kind of like angle down. And so that way you gain more airspeed, you gain more momentum, but you also close in your turning radius. And so when they're kind of turning in, you're going like that, and then all of a sudden you're right behind them. And so that was the big thing in terms of fighting tactics that they did in World War One. World War II is different. Planes are faster. Planes have more armor. Planes are also they can also fly at a higher altitude. They are also, some of them are even lightweight. Everyone has different tactics because of the lack of resources that Japan had. they had to focus more on keeping aircraft lightweight and economical, just so they can get it out in the air. And it actually worked out. The Ki-27, the Ki-43 ended up being one of the most maneuverable aircraft at low speeds in history. And so, at the same time, you know what the common saying with American technology is you strap a rocket to a brick, you can make it fly, essentially. And so that's what they did with the P-40, essentially. They built a powerful engine, stuck it inside of an aircraft with a lot of armor that's heavier. And what you do get a powerful aircraft, but it's also slower and less maneuverable. So what Claire Chennault came up with was boom and zoom tactics. So essentially, B and Z. So here's where I'm getting to with this. So now, you got the P-40. It's heavier, but it has a much more powerful engine. It's also got a lot of armor. It does. With that said, it carries more momentum. The Ki-27, the Ki-43, on the other hand, is lightweight, more maneuverable at low speeds. So now, Claire Chennault came up with the boom and zoom tactics. Basically, he starts at high altitude. So if he notices the enemy, he wants you guys to fly above it. Then he wants you to dive on them. So that way, you gain more momentum, you gain more speed. And I'm going to put this right here. Yeah, you gain more momentum, you gain more speed than them, and that way you can also escape faster, because he knows that you cannot get into a turning dogfight with these guys, because they will win every single time. Whew. So by diving, you will fire on them, and so that way you could take one out, maybe even two if you're lucky, and then you can recover. You can recover by using the airspeed that you have at the point of firing. Once you get that, then that's when you pull up and use that momentum to carry you back up to altitude, so you can repeat and do it all over again. That was his tactic to essentially combat the Japanese aircraft that were extremely nimble, extremely lightweight. But also, because they were lightweight, they also lacked armor, so it's very easy to shoot them down if you were able to successfully use this tactic. So that's what the US is doing in China. And then also, you got the Blitzkrieg. So by this same point, 1939, 1940, Germany decides, well, I have a pact with Russia, so then I'm just going to take out France and Britain and the western part of Europe, so that way I can just focus on actually invading Russia, focus all my sources on Russia. So he comes up with the Blitzkrieg. So the Blitzkrieg is a lightning war, essentially, or a lightning movement, and it's called shorter for the Blitz. So you got Blitzkrieg. So Blitzkrieg essentially is just a lightning war. So Nazi Germany by this point ends up occupying, because of this, fast. So basically he mobilizes his Wehrmacht, what makes like an army, essentially. And so then he also mobilized his air force, the Luftwaffe. So he's got essentially it's been a while since I've touched Russian. So these were the three. So you got the Kriegsmarine, you got the Luftwaffe, and then you also got the Wehrmacht. So all of these essentially worked in unison to attack all these countries just pretty much all at once. And so essentially, where you got yeah. So Britain by this point ends up attacking Belgium, taking it over. He also ends up attacking the Netherlands, took it over. He also attacked Norway and ended up taking that as well. And so, by this point, Germany has now pushed these allies into France. He's now pushing into France by this point. This is about June in the summer. And so, by this point, you got 350 soldiers on the beaches of France in the what was it? In the the English Strait right there at Dunkirk. And so by this point 350 of those soldiers end up being evacuated, and France now capitulates. France ends up surrendering to Germany in June. Now, this is where things get kind of hairy. So I know this is a U.S. history class, but because I'm explaining how things are happening in Europe, that's how you know things are getting real shitty in terms of outside of with foreign relations and stuff like that. So by this point, they're still giving supplies over to Europe and its allies, the U.S. is, but because the P-40 actually, you guys are gonna tell me to shut up when it comes to the P-40, but I can't. Great aircraft. It just looks cool. Also, the fact that it has 50 caliber guns in the nose and the P-40A, I believe, P-40B, and then 30 caliber guns in the wings. But then also when it came to the P-40C and other variants after that, it actually switched to 6 50 caliber guns in the, I believe, 2. Sorry, so 4. So actually no, I believe it is 6. Yeah, 6 50 caliber guns in the wings. Dude, this aircraft's so badass. I digress. So back to the point. July. So another point with the P-40 is that France called for aid from the U.S. So the U.S. actually made a batch of P-40s to be sent to France, but because they got invaded, the Britain started asking for supplies. So the U.S. diverted supplies from France to Britain. So now you get French aircraft or U.S.-made aircraft that were meant for French people, but then got sent to Britain. So things got kind of weird there. But essentially, Britain did get the aircraft. So now, Britain, by the opening of the Battle of Britain, has the Spitfire, the Hurricane, and then the P-40 to fight against the German Luftwaffe, who started bombing. I believe they started bombing Britain in the following year after that. And so now what I'm getting to is July. July, that's when Germany essentially takes over France and all its resources, especially its navy. And so this port, Mers el Kabir, that was essentially the last port where French naval ships were at. And Britain understood that if Germany got a hold of the French ships, it will grow its navy and it will become a vastly more destructive. It would become a vastly bigger problem to Britain if Germany now has ships that will occupy the English Strait, as well as the North Sea, Baltic, places like that. And so, the British thought of a couple ways of doing this. So they can either force France to sail their ships into British territory and have British control them, or Britain can blockade that French port, but Britain does not have the naval power to also blockade the French port and also defend its own land against the German Kriegsmarine as well. So that was out. So now, they wanted to also keep. Where is it? So they want to also keep German occupation in the Mediterranean Sea at the bare minimum. And by doing so, they would have to get rid of the French fleet somehow. And so, I lost my train of thought. I always lose my train of thought. And so, so Britain, they sail their fleet into Mers el Kabir. They send a letter over to. Actually, they receive a letter. So they received a letter that was being telegrammed by the French, and there was this loss of translation that caused everything to go south. And so, sorry. So there's two translations that kind of mess things up, which caused all this. So, verify. There you go. So in the telegram, it talked about the French naval ships, and it said sous control. So I believe that's how it's said. I'm not a French major or anyone, but essentially, that's what the British thought, to take control. But this is actually what it meant, to verify. So the Germans just wanted to keep close tabs on the French ships, which mean take inventory and verify where they are at all times. It didn't mean to take control and use the ships. The British didn't know that. And so, essentially they didn't figure out the translation pretty well. So they sail into the French port, or the French naval port, and they gave him the ultimatum. And so Captain Holland and Captain I think Sunderland, Somerville. So Captain Somerville, Captain Holland, they were in charge of the British fleet. They sail into Mers el Kabir, and they send a letter saying, we'll give you 6 hours to either hand over your ships, or we will fire on you. And so the French, they come back after like 30 minutes of back and forth. They come back saying, we will answer force with force. And so now the French at this time also called for reinforcements, because they found it appalling that the British would turn their guns on a former ally. And so they were really taken back by this, but essentially they stood their ground and they did not want to give up their ships. And so the French, after they calling their reinforcements, they sent another letter out to the British saying, like, hey, we'll settle matters right now, or you will answer to reinforcements. By 6 p.m., there is no answer. Summerland, he's kind of shaken by this. He doesn't want to fire on the Allies, but he will do what he has to save Britain, essentially, or save the crown. And so by this time, he doesn't want to essentially, where's the by this time, he now faces reinforcements from the west and also Germans from the east. He doesn't want that. So, Oh, and then also you got Italian forces as well. But the French commander, Sol, he told the French ships that once this happens, they will leave port and they'll fire back. And so nothing happens, and Summerlin ultimately he told the HMS Hood open fire. So everything, all hell breaks loose, and the ships are still in port too. So now, in the midst of firing, they now have to leave port, and so they do what Gensol, they do what he asked. They're trying to leave port by also firing back as well. But because the British are in open sea, essentially, yeah, the British, they're in open sea, so they maneuver as much as they want to avoid fire. But at the same time, once they have swordfish. So swordfish essentially is a British biplane, a British torpedo biplane, but also used as reconnaissance. So there is a pair or a pack of swordfishes that fly over the Mers el Kabir and hone in on the coordinates for the ships. And so then that allows the British ships to get an accurate sighting on these ships, and they just fire away. And so it's complete chaos. And so by doing so, there we go. Let's see here. So essentially, the whole entire French Navy is completely decimated, and I believe the only two ships that stayed moored were the Dunkirk and the Provence for the vast majority of time. And so you got the Breton. I believe it's called the Breton. Bretagne. No, the Breton. Or probably not. I'm probably screwing up the spelling really bad. Alright. So all four of these ships ended up being completely decimated. The Britann, I think Breton, I don't know, or Breton, yeah, Breton, I guess, I don't know. But essentially, the magazine was hit. I believe like 350 like tons or something like that, and essentially ends up exploding, and this ship is basically evaporated. And so I believe I'll post a picture, I believe, of the attack and like the ships. But essentially, the big explosion in the middle is this. That is pretty much evaporated. And then you got the Dunkirk. So Dunkirk ended up getting rid of its moorings, but because it started being heavily damaged by 15 millimeter cannon fire, that ends up being beached because due to damages, and it never saw the light of day. And so the Mogador essentially had the same issue. So it was being damaged, and it had depth charges on top of the ship. So the depth charges went off, completely destroyed the stern. It started taking on water, so it ended up beaching itself as well. And so then the Provence. So Provence suffered the same fate as the Breton. And so that one, the Provence ended up having its magazine hit, but it flooded its magazine in time just to keep the ship afloat. But it was still taking on water, still sinking, so that one was damaged as well beyond repair. So 1,300 Frenchmen in the midst of like 10 minutes ended up dying. And the Strasbourg was the only French ship to actually make it out of port, get through the hail of gunfire. It evaded capture or sighting by the Swordfish torpedo aircraft, and it actually made it into, I believe, a British port. And then it was actually welcomed with open arms as well. And so after all this was said and done, Somerville, he was heavily distraught about it. He felt just that the fact that they had to fire on their allies really took a toll on his mental health going forward. But essentially, by 1940, as we go back to America, by 1940, September 1940, FDR was heavily impressed by Churchill's resolve. Is that the fact that he was willing to do what was necessary to save his own country. So FDR signed this agreement, Destroyers for Bases Agreement. So destroyers for bases essentially allowed America to trade its naval ships in exchange for a 99-year lease on any naval or air force, a naval port or air force airstrip that was controlled by the British. For bases. There you go. So destroyers for bases, essentially, that's what I said. So it was just a naval and air bases that were controlled by the British in the Atlantic and the Caribbean were now under a lease for America. And then as well, they also allowed Americans to volunteer for the Eagle Squadron. So the Eagle Squadron was created by the Royal Air Force to allow volunteers to fight for them. And so initially, most Americans went up into Canada to fight with the Royal Canadian Air Force up there. And as well, others went overseas to the Royal Air Force and fought for them as well. But most of them ended up actually fighting for Finland against Russia, and then also fighting in the Atlantic, the Battle of the Atlantic, Battle of the Atlantic. And so, by this point as well, FDR's term coming to an end, and it's either he can retire, and this actually is in the book. This was actually in the book from Pearl Harbor to Munich. From Munich to Pearl Harbor. This is one of the books that I ended up offering that you guys either buy or you can look up or rent. And it talks about how he had major reserves about running for a third presidency. And it was either A, he does not give up on the people and he runs for a third term, or he doesn't run, he retires back to his home estate, and he lives out the rest of his life in peace and quiet. Well, he ends up going for the latter, or he ends up going for the former, and he runs for a third term. He ends up actually getting elected for a third term, which was the only president in history, and will be the only president in history to be elected for a third term. I hope I do not eat my words. And so, he ends up running for a third term. He gets the presidency. And then, what was it? So then he ends up increasing war production, and he exports, the export demands actually pull America out of this depression. And so because of the war, inadvertently, it ends up saving America's economy. And so now the arms embargo was lifted, and then the British actually end up beginning to receive American aid, which is like aircraft or ships, weapons, stuff like that. And it's not even with payment anymore. It's just straight up, we're going to help you. And so now the Lend-Lease Agreement comes out. So Lend-Lease Agreement comes out in March of 1941. The Lend-Lease Agreement is just a massive influx of aircraft that were sent over to Britain, sent over to Russia, because by this point, Operation Barbarossa happens, where Germany now surprisingly invades Russia in the summer. So March, April, May, June. So about like yeah, about June, I believe. June. Yeah, I believe about June 1941, they invade Russia. So now this Lend Lease agreement, he ends up supplying the P-39 Air Cobra and the P-40 over, and I believe the Buffalo, I want to say, over to Russia. And at the same time, he supplies the P-40 over to Britain. And so now, yeah, massive influx of to Britain, but also Japan by this point they ignore American they ignore notes and what do you call that? Like essentially they ignore America's attempt to push Japan out of China. So now instead of Southeast China, they're now pushing into northern French Indochina, into like Beijing and places like that. And so now by August 1st, um, America has to do something. So what do? They place an oil embargo on Japan. Japan is heavily influenced by oil. So by doing so, it loses 90% of its oil supply. Japan now has no way to control all this land, and now Japan needs a way to push forward. So, so now by this point, Japan is heavily in need of resources, and what do they? Oh shoot! And so, what do they look forward to? They look forward to those islands right there. So, they're looking forward to Hawaii. Hawaii and the Pacific Islands of. You also got the Philippines. You also got the Mariana Islands, the Marshall Islands, places like that, where the Midway Islands as well. And so, and also they're gonna have to push down into Indonesia. So Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, places like that, Manila. So they're gonna have to take over all that in order to establish enough resources to sustain their empire. And the only way they're gonna do that is to get rid of Allied presence in the Northern Pacific and the South Pacific. And the only way to do that is to get rid of very swiftly American presence. And so, because Australia is mostly wrapped up with the Royal Air Force, Australia and Royal New Zealand Air Force, they're also going to be helping Britain with Europe. So they're pretty much tied up. Japan believes that that should be a swift victory, especially if they take control of New Guinea, so they can rush and do an invasion of Australia. At the same time, they're going to have to kick the United States out of the war really quickly, because Japan knows that if America gets into this war, it's essentially over, because their war machine is massive. And under the direction of Admiral Yamamoto, and I want to say, Admiral Yamamoto. So he's in charge of the naval, I believe the Japanese naval forces, and he essentially comes up with this plan to essentially take out Pearl Harbor, take out the naval base at Oahu, which essentially, if they destroy the entire naval forces at Oahu, he can then control everything. And if they attack swift enough, they can control the Pacific really quick, within like a year or two, which they almost come pretty close to doing. And so there's a lot of intel, a lot of spies that infiltrate Hawaii, and a lot of people who are sentimental to the Japanese cause. They are also in Hawaii, stationed in Hawaii, and they cooperate and send pictures. They get information about anything and everything. How many ships are there? What aircraft carriers are going to be there? And essentially, they get notification that every single aircraft carrier that the U.S. has is moored in Pearl Harbor at that point. As well, they understand the depth of Pearl Harbor. I believe, at the time, I want to say, I might get this wrong. What, maybe 90 feet? I want to say something like that, where it's really not that deep at all. And so now they have to figure out a way to attack Pearl Harbor, but also allow their torpedoes to be capable of being fired in shallow water. No, I want to say it's like 50 feet. Yeah, actually, I'm gonna look this up. Because I'm really curious. I saw it a while ago. Depth of Pearl. There we go. Yeah, about 45 feet. Sorry, my bad. And so it's 45 feet, very shallow. They had to figure out a way to fire torpedoes in that. And so they figure out a way by creating this wooden fin. And so essentially it becomes this buoyant torpedo so that essentially once it hits the water, the back of the torpedo will be able to stay lifted by that fin, and it can push forward. So essentially it'll be traveling through the water at an angle versus if it just lays flat and then it kind of scoops up like that, usually how most torpedoes would work. And so now they create that, they lay diagrams of Oahu, they do wartime exercises. They essentially get ready, and then by this time they also have the Type 0, which is essentially the Zero, the A6M. They also had the Type 99, the Val dive bomber. They have a bunch of other aircraft. They have high level bombers. They also have torpedoes, aircraft. They have attack aircraft. They also have, of course, fighters to help support them. So that's gonna be the plan. I'm gonna hold off there because that's gonna become the attack at Pearl Harbor, and I'm gonna save that for the next time because that is very in depth. That will take a lot of time to get through. But essentially, it's actually my favorite battle. It's the first battle that I found out about when I started discovering World War II when I was younger. First World War II movie that I saw, apart from Saving Private Ryan, which I was not supposed to see either movie because I was too young at the time, but I still saw it. Actually, I believe that's the first. Pearl Harbor was the first movie that I saw with my parents. That was World War II related, and then that's when the seed was planted. That's when I started learning about all this. As I also, I'm stuttering right now. That's essentially how I got into the P-40 as my favorite aircraft, was because of Pearl Harbor as well. And so, I'm going to go over Pearl Harbor next time, and that'll be the beginning of the World War II segment. The World War II segment, I'm going to break it up in half. I'm going to start out with I believe I'm going to start out with the Pacific. I'm going to start out with the Pacific theater, and then I'm going to go into the European theater next. I'm not going to do them both at the same time because both parts are extremely information heavy, and so I want to make sure I do each part due diligence, and so I'm going to split them up in half. Essentially about 2 weeks worth. It's going to be like that, and so this will actually coincide with your midterm because your midterm will be due in March, and then by that time I should be done with World War II and have enough time to get through then up to 1991, which will be the end of this class. And so hopefully I covered everything pretty well. If there's anything else that I may have missed or that I did not pronounce right or that factual I may need changed out, please let me know. But otherwise, yeah, this is believed the 10 years leading up to World War II, and this is kind of how World War II kicks off. And so, yeah, I'm going to stop it right there. And now, yeah, I believe you guys won't have an assignment until the beginning. After this writing assignment, you won't have another assignment. And so I will be down with my parents again this evening. But if you guys have any questions, please let me know. And then also, I do have my term final this coming week, so I'll be studying for that for the most part. And so that's why I kind of set the homework for after the term final, so I have some time to study for that in between. I'll be starting up clinicals as well, and so I know I'll be kind of busy. But if you guys do need any help with your writing assignment, definitely let me know. And otherwise, just take care, enjoy the snow, or if you don't like snow, stay inside. And then just, yeah, otherwise, I hope you guys like my mug. It's got a little bunch of facts on it about the P-40. I hope you guys like the P-40. I hope you guys look up stuff about the P-40. And I hope you watch some videos on it because this is such a cool aircraft. And I know a lot of people, I will die on this hill, that it is just as maneuverable as a Spitfire at low to medium altitudes. And it is also just as maneuverable as the P-51 at high altitudes with the Merlin engine as well. And so I will die on that hill that the P-40 is not as bad as people say. But people are going to say whatever they're going to say. So I'm going to keep it like that. But otherwise, if you guys have any questions, let me know what your favorite plane is. If you have a favorite one, if you're into that, just let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to just leave it at that. Everything good. We're just going to enjoy life. All right, so take care, guys. See you on the next one. See you on the big one. Stay frosty. Happy hunting. Bob's your uncle. Take care.